case of EU energy sovereignty, which is a fascinating title, not the case for EU energy sovereignty, but also the use of the word sovereignty. And I was at a briefing last night along with Samantha, with the Director General, and I said to her afterwards, I said, this requires some careful consideration, because obviously sovereignty is a critical issue within the 27 nations of the European Union and other countries in Europe. I happen to be from another country in Europe, unfortunately. But what we want to do, therefore, is we are a sovereign country with a new king. Thank you very much indeed, Guntram. And the king visited Berlin recently to underscore that. So, but we're talking about sovereignty. But what I'd like to do, ask each of the panelists immediately, is to define what this could mean, because it is quite delicate. So can you do that in summary form? But I know everyone would like to hear as well from the Director General, and Guntram has already made this point, and Samantha as well. Let's hear as well the kind of briefing that we need on how successful Europe has been in getting out of the woods, as the Director General briefed about last night, on energy security, and what measures have already worked and the prospects. So it's again a briefing plus a discussion of the issue. So for the moment, for the opening, can I just ask the Director General, Ditte Juul Jørgensen, Director General for Energy, quickly on the issue of sovereignty only. Is this really the way we should be looking at it? And then go to Guntram Wolff, who's the Director and CEO of the German Council on Foreign Relations, and also to Samantha Gross, who's the Director for Energy Security and Climate Initiative, focusing on international cooperation at Brookings. Welcome to you all. So we've got 35 minutes to get this done.
Thank you very much. If you allow me, I would like to make the link between the security and what we have been through over the last year, and sovereignty as a longer term and broader concept than the immediate security and security of supply. Because of course, over the last year in the energy crisis, with Russia removing significant amounts of natural gas from the global market and directly from the European Union, we faced an immediate security of supply challenge in the European Union. We were in that challenging situation because of Russia's behavior, the Russian invasion into Ukraine, but also because we were too dependent on one supplier for a critical source for our energy system and our economy. And so our response to that, and I will not go into detail, I promise, was Repower EU, reducing our dependence on Russia, essentially through energy savings, reducing our demand, more renewables, accelerating the deployment of renewable energy, and of course diversifying to other suppliers. And I think the very short conclusion to what we've been through over the last year is we managed to stay together. We have had EU unity, we have had swift action, joint action, and we have actually managed to reduce our dependence on Russian fossil fuels much more than anyone would have expected, and go into this next year, the next filling season, the next winter, a lot more comfortable than the winter before. There are many risks out there, nonetheless, but I think we've done what we can internally. The reason I start with that is that I think what we have learned in that security crisis and that security challenge is also about sovereignty. So I think there are some longer term lessons from that crisis management and the emergency we have found ourselves in, both in the sense that the factors that brought us the challenges, that brought us into the crisis, should not be repeated. So in order to be sovereign, in order to be secure in a longer term, we need to make sure that we change the fundamentals, the structures. And at the same time, I think it's important not to overcorrect, if you will, in the sense that sovereignty does not equal independence or self-sufficiency. Self-sufficiency would be a very expensive, very, very costly answer to security and sovereignty concerns. So the question really is rather, how do we make best use of the resources we have? How do we strengthen our own resources? And that's about innovation and technology, because we're not geologically as in a favorable position as other parts of the world are. We can do a lot through innovation, through investment, making use of skills, and the many strong sides of the European Union, our internal market. And then we can make use of partnerships, working with more reliable nations, always making sure that we do not become too dependent on one or the other. But that partnership and that international openness and open trade policy is partly, together with the internal market, what has brought us where we are today in terms of being an economic strong power, the largest market in the world still.
And how would you describe the level of cooperation between the 27? Have they shed, in many ways, because of energy, the issues of sovereignty and national interest? In other words, they've come together or not?
They have come together. I think it's been an extraordinary year in terms of how member states work together. If I focus on the field of energy, where I have been following the closest, ministers met, I think, 12 times during 2022. That's about 3 times as much as they would normally meet. They had to work very, very closely together to bring results in terms of market correction, in terms of demand reduction on gas, in terms of addressing electricity peaks and electricity prices, accelerating permitting, filling storage, a number of these considerations that would typically be considered at national level because it would be so closely linked to security and sovereignty. And it became very clear during the crisis that the only answer to security and the only answer to sovereignty is to do that jointly. It was clear for all capitals that it required a common European response, and that was actually never in doubt in these many meetings of energy ministers. Everyone came together, everyone helped find solutions. At times it was difficult, at times it took more than one council meeting, or it took many hours of discussion, but everyone engaged towards finding solutions.
What's your view about the level of cooperation, but also how much sovereignty is an issue or not?
Well, thanks so much for having me. So I moved last year from Brussels, where I was running Bruegel, the European economic think tank, to Berlin, where I now run the German Council on Foreign Relations. And of course, that is also a shift in perspective on many issues. Now, what you said, Director General, immediately resonates with, of course, my Brussels times. But I would say on the broad points, I would still agree, even from my Berlin times. So let me give you really three key points. I mean, the first is we all realized last year that energy is more than just any other commodity. And that wasn't so clear in the heads of many people. It was considered just to be a commodity like any other, but now we realize that it can be really weaponized by actors, by states, to very detrimental economic effects potentially. So this was the first big realization. The second, and there I agree with the Director General, with Ditte, Juul, Jørgensen, is that very quickly last year, all European countries realized that the worst thing would be to let the single market for energy be fundamentally disrupted. So the continuous flow of energy, of molecules, all of a sudden, not from the east to the west, but from the west to the east and from the north to the south, was absolutely a priority and was never interrupted. And this is really important. I mean, Germany, as a sort of key country in the middle, imported, as you know, a lot of gas, more than 50% of its gas from Russia, from the east essentially. That changed in the course of the year fundamentally, but what changed with it is that Germany also provided gas to the east of Europe. So it provided gas to Slovakia, to Austria. The direction of flow changed, and that is, I think, a very good sign of unity. And of course, economically, it makes perfect sense to do so, because if you don't do so, your whole supply chain, and the German supply chain that is very much integrated in the Central and Eastern Europe, would have broken down. So it was clear from the beginning that this would have to happen. We also achieved a lot in terms of energy savings, and you talked about it. So the way the subsidy schemes were and the social schemes were organized was done in a way that the price signal was preserved. So in Germany, the price signal was not taken away. On the contrary, it really became quite expensive to consume energy. We all reduced our heatings, put on additional sweaters, worked in home offices, etc., etc. And that really helped to bring down consumption of energy by 20% roughly, depending on the week, even if you adjust for temperature. So the demand reduction was very important, and because of the price signal, it was done in an efficient way so that the economy did not collapse. On the contrary, the economy avoided a major recession. At the same time, there was a huge response on the supply side, and we managed to really build all these LNG terminals in really very, very short period of time. So coming to perhaps the last point, because you talked about self-sufficiency and sovereignty, and you used the concept of reliable nations. And my take is really that we need to be very careful about this concept of more reliable nations as partners, because everybody thought, not everybody, let's say not every, sorry, many people thought, Russia during the whole Cold War always delivered the gas. So on gas, it could be a reliable nation. Of course, that was a big mistake, and I think many have warned the German government and many others that it was a mistake. My institute has also been among those that really warned about the excessive reliance of Russia on Russia. But this concept of reliable nation is one that is, to my mind, highly difficult, because politics changes very quickly in many countries, and all of a sudden a reliable nation is not a reliable nation. So I would really urge us not to move to self-sufficiency, but also not to think about only reliable nations, but really think about diversification of supplies and make sure if you have 10 unreliable nations, but they all want to sell the stuff to you, then you're fine, right? So this is.
Let me be clear, you use the word unity. Does unity equal sovereignty?
No, sovereignty is something else than unity, but I would say European EU sovereignty, the way we use that term, I tend to use this term, is a sui generis term. It's really different to national sovereignty, but it's not the same as every country just does what it wants on its own. So it's sui generis, really.
Samantha is nodding very energetically there. Can you pick this up, particularly put it in, not just EU sovereignty, but put it into context of the other international cooperation you've seen at Brookings?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for the invitation to be here this morning. And yes, I'd like to talk a little bit about, I agree with much of what has been said, and I'd also like to expand the conversation just a little bit. I too was troubled by the word sovereignty when I saw the title of this and thought a bit about what my opening remarks might be. I feel like energy sovereignty has become the new energy independence, or it is the trendy new word for a concept that I don't necessarily agree with. I agree with the previous speakers when we've talked about strength through diversification, interdependencies. I completely agree that this focus on reliable nations may be somewhat misguided. I don't disagree that Russia looked reliable there for a while. It also looked like a good idea economically, in that those pipes were already in the ground, the gas was inexpensive. It was a difficult political decision to take to move away from that gas. And it's very easy for us all to have a lot of schadenfreude now, to use a good German word. But at the time, those decisions were less troubling than they appear now. And that talk of economics brings up the second point that I'd like to make. And that is that I've heard a lot of discussion here over the last couple of days about security taking prevalence over economics in decisions that are happening, largely because of what has happened with the war in Ukraine, but for other reasons as well. And I think we can think of this sovereignty issue as a security issue, and that's a word that I find more helpful and that lends itself better to conversation. But a big question for me in this economics versus security question, and this ties back to sovereignty, is who are we relying on during the energy transition? I get asked all the time in my travels, in my work, are we trading reliance on China with all of its manufacturing capacity and critical minerals capacity? Are we trading one set of autocracies in the oil powers for another in China? I would generally argue no, for a lot of reasons we can talk about later. But you are seeing both Europe and the United States really focused on building out their own industries, both minerals, mining, and refining. You're also seeing a focus on advanced manufacturing for various kinds of technologies that we need for the energy transition. This is an absolute no-brainer, to use in a good American term. We should be doing this. But the question for me is one of economics and timing. Can we get this work done in time for the transition that we need, which we all agree here I think needs to be done quickly? Or are we going to become more reliant for a time on different powers than we've been reliant on before? This is a question I get asked all the time going forward. You see it in EU policy, you see it in US policy with the Inflation Reduction Act. Are we more focused on going fast? Are we more focused on nearshoring, onshoring, friendshoring? And so that's a real question for me that ties back to sovereignty and security, but how we go forward in the energy transition. Who are we relying on and for how long? So I think I'll leave it there, but hopefully that's food for thought.
But Samantha, again, that question, what have you seen in other nations as well around the world, beyond the European Union, about sovereignty, even if we're uncomfortable with the use of the word? Has there been an assertiveness of sovereignty, which we've seen in many other countries during the energy crisis?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think this ultimate trade-off between, I see that playing out in terms of, do we want to do this here, or do we want to be interdependent? You saw it with respect to supply chains after the COVID crisis. I mean, we're really seeing this emphasis on, I hate to say deglobalization, that seems too strong, but on nearshoring, friendshoring, somewhat putting the genie back in the bottle of globalization. And how does that play into the energy transition?
All right. Well, look, for the next, you can see how much time we've got left. We've got 20 minutes, and there are 3 of you. But I'd like to hear more from you about your assessment of how well we have done, or how well Europe has done. You gave a long briefing yesterday, Director General. If you can summarize some of that for those who are not there. And Guntram, I know, wants to talk about that too. So if you can adjust your timings to the kind of time we have available. And if we then can open it up as well, if you've got time. So do it as briefly as you can.
Thank you very much. Well, we came into the energy crisis with a very, very high level of dependency on Russia. More than 40% of our natural gas came from Russia, but together with a significant share of oil and coal, so very, very significant dependence on one supplier. And I think if we stay away from the reliability or not, I think the point is very good that reliability links into the share of dependence on any one nation. It is not a question of one being more reliable than the other. It is a question of diversification, as the previous panelists have said. So I'd fully agree with that. But it was very, very clear that the level of dependence we were facing was unsustainable and put a significant risk to our security, including our economic security, and in that sense our sovereignty, if you want to use that word. But really the economic security was the key point here. I thought what was interesting in the experience looking back was how quickly the 27 European Union member states came together at leaders level to endorse what the Commission had proposed, the Repower EU, the plan to cut our dependence on Russian fossil fuels in particular, and to do that very quickly. And that was supported by heads of state and government just a few weeks after Russia had invaded Ukraine, and we started putting the plan in motion, as I said, building on the 3 pillars of reducing our demand. And again, it really is looking at what can you control? We could not control the Russian supply that was being cut. We could not control the number of global factors, the Chinese demand, but we could address our own demand and reduce that as much as possible through energy savings and energy efficiency. We knew that the best way to become more secure, more energy secure, but also more economically secure, would be to accelerate the transition towards greener energy. So the climate crisis and the energy crisis essentially came together last year and pushed an acceleration of the transition to more renewable energy, and we deployed we saw a significant increase in the deployment of renewable energy across the European Union, photovoltaic and wind energy most notably. And then the diversification, and that is again bringing us back to the reliance. We diversified significantly the supply. You said at Guntram the fact that we simply had to shift our whole infrastructure system so that it could cater for natural gas flowing north to south, west to east, and south to north, rather than the east to west, which had been the traditional supply routes, the traditional transport of natural gas in particular within the European Union. So it required some very, very shift infrastructure investments, including LNG terminals in different parts of Europe that have made this possible. And so if you do the report card, if you will, at the end of that first year of the war and at the end of the first year of the energy crisis, we have come out of it strengthened, and we have come out of it more sovereign, if you will, in a European sense. And I think you're right, sovereignty in a European Union sense is different from national sovereignty by definition, but we've come out of it stronger, more strongly united, and with a very clear sense of the need for a European response to those security challenges. If I may, just a word on this question of security versus economics. I think it's important that we do not juxtapose the two. They belong together. It is about our economic security, and I think it's about the temporal aspect, if you will. You can be secure tomorrow, but if you want to be secure in 10 years, well, then clearly building a 50% reliance on Russian gas is not a good way to get there. And so that longer-term perspective in building a strong economy it also requires an analysis of the economic security aspects of that and investments into that diversification. And final word on this is, it's clear that the best path to that security, again, it is the energy transition, it is the green transition, it is more renewables. And as others have said, that implies other challenges in terms of dependence, in particular on critical raw materials coming from one supplier globally or with a very significant position of one supplier. And so there are other dependencies and other risks that we need to address in relation to the energy transition, and that's what we're working on now.
Thank you. Guntram.
Yeah, let me, if you can switch off again, let me continue where the Director General ended, which is really about this rollout of renewable energy as a response to supply security, but also as a response to climate change. So we've seen last year an acceleration in the rollout of renewable energy in the European Union, which was significant. I think the increase in photovoltaic was something in the order of magnitude 50% more than the year before. So this is quite a significant shift. And the question, and Samantha also alluded to it, do we create new dependencies and do we create new risks, and what are those risks? If you will, this discussion is now a discussion really around three different concepts. So one discussion is about accelerating this rollout for climate change purposes, so it's climate policy. One discussion is security policy, and then there's a third discussion, which is industrial policy. We want to have companies that actually do this kind of stuff, right? That do solar panels, that do photovoltaic and wind energy, etc., batteries. So these are three totally different concepts, what the United States has done with its Inflation Reduction Act, what China has been doing for many years now, and what now Europe is starting to do is really trying to bring those three concepts together into a coherent framework and push this forward. What I find interesting in this debate is that the European Union woke up to this really quite, if I may say so, quite late, realizing, oh, the United States has done this Inflation Reduction Act.
In time, or not?
Well, I mean, I would say in time, but it would have been better to react a bit earlier. Then I think one could have done more with the United States on this, right? So in that sense, there was a missed opportunity. But let me just say, when I look at the two packages that the Commission has put out, the Net Zero Industry Act and the Critical Raw Materials Act, my overall sense is that the traditional industrial policy aspects have become very important while some of the security arguments to me look more like hand waving. So let me give you just a sort of walk through very concretely through one thing, which is solar panels. Yes, China dominates global solar panel supplies. It produces the stuff very cheaply thanks to cheaper labor costs and cheaper energy costs. Everybody buys Chinese solar panels. Now, is this a security risk? I'm not so sure. I mean, the solar panel that sits on my roof is going to continue to operate even if China stops exporting it, right? I mean, so it's not like you can tap off the gas that Russia could do. So it's a very different kind of security risk we have to think about, which is a security risk about the speed of the rollout of renewable energy. It's about perhaps in specific digital aspects of the solar panels and the energy system where you have cyber risks and all of that stuff. So there are security risks, but the nature of these risks look quite different to sort of the gas tap being switched off. So my sense is, and if I may critique the Commission here, is that the traditional industrial policy aspects, we want to have that industry, have become too important instead of really focusing on the real security issues. Yes, we need some diversification, but we don't need to produce this stuff here. I mean, we can produce some of this, ask Malaysia to produce this, or Vietnam, if we are worried about one supplier. But, you know, really thinking we could move some of the industries where we have cost disadvantages of 30% or something of that sort, move them with subsidies here is not going to work.
Let's pause there. I'd like to give you a response to that, but you can see the time, and I'm up against that. So, Samantha, coming quickly on any points you want to pick up, particularly the question which the Director General raised last night: are we out of the woods, or are we heading to be out of the woods, whether in the European Union or more broadly?
Yeah, the EU response has been impressive and impressively unified. I mean, there's a lot to praise in what has happened over the past year and a half, but it isn't over. And I don't say that to be critical, I say that just because it's true. There were a lot of very good actions that took place, everything from reducing gas demand to finding additional supply, pushing the renewables transition. However, the next couple of years look difficult as well. There's no new LNG on the water this year. That's unfortunate, but it's true. And we're looking at potential growing Chinese demand for gas during this year. And so enjoy the summer and then get ready for the following winter, because it's not over. The other thing that I'd like to add to what was said is...
Surely we should be preparing now, not waiting until after the summer.
Oh, absolutely. But I think you can enjoy the summer and fill the storage simultaneously. I hope so, anyway. The other thing I'd like to comment is I completely agree on your difference between materials and fuels, and that's fundamentally a different kind of security risk. But I think we also need to acknowledge that a changed energy system almost certainly does create new risks and new dependencies. And because we're doing this systematically and we're thinking hard about how we do it, we have the opportunity to think about these risks strategically, think about where our advantages are and how to take advantage of them. We can think about the geopolitical risks and the supply chain risks and take those on systematically because we know they're coming. And on the manufacturing question, I agree that the EU economy, the US economy, and others, we are not likely to become the low-cost producer of solar panels. We're just not. But we have our own forms of competitive advantage. We both have huge markets that are real prizes for companies to take on. We both have very active innovation economies. We have good finance. There's a lot of things that we can do in our countries that are real advantages for getting new technologies going. And so I think we need to focus on what we're good at and think about that when we think about how to strategize about the new risks that the new energy system brings.
Thanks, Samantha. You can see we've got 4 minutes left, and it's a brutal time regime here. But I'd like to give the Director General a response. Does anyone want to come in with one question? I'm going to get you the microphone. I can't guarantee that you'll speak into it, but let's first hear from the DG. Yes, and he's got, okay, you've got a microphone. But do you want to respond particularly on what Guntram said?
Thank you very much for that opportunity. Yes, I would like to, but maybe first, if I may, I would fully agree with Samantha. It is not over. We are still in a global energy crisis, and our response continues. We have the measures in place, the instruments in place, and we continue to develop them. We're going into next winter much better prepared. But we're also looking at the winter after that, because we're not going to see significant new supplies coming online in terms of natural gas globally over the coming couple of years. As Samantha said, there are a number of risks and challenges as regards demand from China, for example. So we're certainly not out of the woods, and continue to both be prepared, but also to actively make the changes that are necessary. And that brings me to the points that Guntram made around our response to the Inflation Reduction Act. I think you could turn it around, and I hear many on the other side of the Atlantic doing that, suggesting that the Inflation Reduction Act is in fact a response to things we have been doing. And so the question really is, how do these different measures come together? I think one way of looking at it is that we are all facing a global climate crisis. We are all facing a global energy crisis. And we are all looking to how do we best organize ourselves, and how do we best work with partners to address those challenges. Our response has been the European Green Deal, which is a comprehensive package of regulatory measures together with significant investments, significant European and national investments and aid to help strengthen the green technologies and to help make the investments into, in particular, renewable energy, energy efficiency, but also all the technologies that will make that transition happen. We have then strengthened the industrial policy aspects of that, the competitiveness aspects of that in the recent Net Zero Industrial Act and the Critical Raw Materials Act, also because the European competitiveness has been threatened by the very high energy prices. We have significantly higher energy prices than the US and China, and so we do need to look at the competitiveness aspects of that and the industrial policy reply to that. I think we have talked about the fact that self-sufficiency is not the way to security or sovereignty or even independence. You find that through strong partnerships, and again, one of the things that has made Europe strong and made European growth has both been the single market, the internal market, and the openness of trade there, but it has also been an open trade policy and partnerships with others. And I think the Net Zero Industrial Act and the Critical Raw Materials Act fall very well into that pathway. We're not looking to produce or manufacture all of the photovoltaic ourselves or all of the any other green technologies, but to strengthen our manufacturing base despite those global challenges.
Let me just hear what you're going to say. I can't guarantee there'll be an answer to it.
Okay, my question is my name is Henri Baki. To you, Director General, I want to combine the two parts of your...
Please do.
So they talked about the EU having a moderate interest in the Eastern Med and the Black Sea. Specifically, from your perspective, what would you like to see with respect to this Eastern Med gas? How would you like it to be developed and get to Europe, for instance?
And can I just add, you did say last night, you know, that encouragement of gas was not going to be a high priority compared to green. So is there a message for the Black Sea, quickly?
Well, I think first of all, the East Med pipeline is a project of common interest. It has a status as a relevant project as we are diversifying our gas supply for the European Union. We are looking at relevant infrastructure in that context. If I may widen your question, open your question, because I think relations in the East Med region and the Mediterranean region more generally will become much more central to the European economy, to European trade, investment, but also to the European energy security. So I think the partnerships with East Med, with the wider East Med region and with the wider Mediterranean, we will see significantly strengthened partnerships and are working closely with partners in the region in that context.
I'm really loath to stop this discussion, but alas, the clock has beaten us. So thank you very much indeed. There's going to be discussion will continue. I have to say, Director General, I was going to say one word, Hungary, when it comes to sovereignty. And, but you've been saved that answer. So thank you very much, all of you, for joining us at this very early hour. So I give you a gold star for turning up. So thank you very much indeed to all of you.